Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for coming. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Chris Marks. I'm the Associate Dean for Student Affairs at Boston University School of Law. And I want to welcome all of our members of our law school community, but also folks from other parts of both Boston University and other schools and colleges around the area, and just other interested people. Thank you so much for coming. I think I don't have to tell you that one of the most difficult international issues that President Obama is facing right now is our relationship with Iran. Tensions have really escalated since the disputed presidential election in Iran in 2009 and over Iran's nuclear program. One of the issues that I think our panelists may be discussing is how do the issues we're facing with Iran have an impact on relationships with Iraq and, of course, Afghanistan. Today, we're very fortunate to have an esteemed panel of experts who hopefully will help us understand some of these difficult issues, but also hopefully offer us some hope for the future. And I should add that I just read today that the International Atomic Energy Chief said that representatives of Iran and its three interlocutors, which are the U.S., Russia, and France, had accepted a draft agreement for forwarding to their capitals. From what I could read, the draft agreement would delay Tehran's ability to make nuclear weapons by sending most of its existing enriched uranium to Russia for processing. So perhaps we'll learn more about that today, but this is ever-changing, and so that's what makes this panel today exciting. The panel is co-sponsored by our National Security Law Society student organization, and I want to thank them for their support. But it would not have been possible at all without the Herculean efforts of Professor Hengame Saberi, who's seated on the farthest end. Professor Saberi is a visiting assistant professor at Boston University School of Law. She received her Bachelor of Law and Masters of International Law degrees from Tehran University, her LLM from McGill University, and currently is an LLM and SJD candidate at Harvard Law School. She has been a visiting professor at the University of Tennessee College of Law and at Brown University, and was a teaching fellow at Harvard University and at Harvard Law School. Professor Saberi will introduce our distinguished panelists and will moderate the discussion, and we will leave time for questions. I do have a microphone for the questioners just so we can hear it, because today's program is being recorded. I want to extend my deepest thanks and appreciation to our panelists, and also to especially Professor Saberi for coming today. Please join me in welcoming Professor Hengame Saberi.
Thank you, everybody, for, is this working? Yes. For being here, and thank you so much, Dean Marks, for this generous introduction. This event would not have happened without the patience and help of Dean Marks herself with so many changes back and forth that we had last minute. And also I must thank the National Security Law Society, the students who helped us a lot with publicity. It wouldn't have happened without their help either. So I'm going to introduce our wonderful group of panelists today who have kindly joined us, agreed to join us for this important conversation. This conversation is around something that is often referred to as the Iran crisis, or to use a less politically laden language, probably it should be referred to as the future of U.S.-Iran negotiations. This month is the month of October, which has been no less than a landmark in the ongoing diplomatic traffic on the Iran's nuclear issue. Though it would appear probably somewhat out of context to think of another October surprise, given the way or the popular usage of this term in the American political jargon, we nevertheless are facing a new phase, obviously, in the Iran-U.S. relationship this month. Just a very small other point on the importance of the conversation we are having today. I had the privilege of running a completely and outrageously non-scientific statistics with the students of the university, the Faculty of Law of the University of Tehran, when I was thinking of the idea of this panel, to ask them the question of how they would have liked such a panel to be organized in a counterpart Faculty of Law in Tehran. I spoke with about 15 students, all politically active, and almost, as I said, the statistics of how I have is outrageously unscientific, but the consensus was a panel on US-Iran negotiations. Are you kidding? We are actually concerned right now with gathering in protest in front of classrooms not to let professors who were either co-opted into working with the government to suppress the protests after the June election, presidential election in Iran, or to chase them away from classrooms. That's what we are doing right now. So you must be very privileged to be speaking about Iran-US negotiations. And I do agree that we are privileged to have this conversation here. That work, the chasing away of professors, is perhaps more fun, but a harder work. So with that in mind, I should probably say something about our terrific group of panelists here. We have Dr. Fatemeh Haqiqatjou, who is a leading Iranian advocate of human rights and democracy. She has been in exile since 2005, first came to the United States to spend a year of fellowship at the Center for International Studies at MIT, and since then has spent bouts of fellowships in the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, the University of Connecticut, and now a visiting scholar at the Center for Women in Politics and Public Policy at the University of Massachusetts. Dr. Haqiqatjou is a former parliament representative, Majlis representative of Iran, was the first to resign when the anti-reform measures of the supreme leader began to take shape. She's a psychologist with a PhD in counseling, was the president of the student movement faction in Majlis, and deputy to the Musharakat party. According to Fatemeh Haqiqatjou, democratization is the central issue of Iran. She has been called the lion woman of Iran. The next speaker, the second speaker, is Representative Denise Provo, who his legislative work has focused on issues such as transportation, public health, and environmental justice. She has also had a long-standing interest in civil liberties and human rights. In the legislature, she has advocated for issues of national and international importance, including marriage equality, stronger scrutiny of international trade agreements, and engagement with Iran. Next to her, we have Professor Kamran Dadkha, who comes here from the economics department of the New Eastern University. His area of interest are econometrics, macroeconomics, international economics, and Middle Eastern economies. Professor Dadkha has previously worked in various positions, including in the Development and Investment Bank of Iran, and he's been the director of General Economy Bureau, Plan and Budget Organization of Iran. He's also published in various economics journals, and his last book is Macroeconomic Theory and Policy, Springer 2000, The Evolution of Macroeconomic Theory and Policy, Springer 2009. The latest addition to our panel is Mr. Ahmad Rafat, who is an internationally known Iranian journalist born in Tehran. He has worked with for more than 21 years as a correspondent for the Middle East and Balkans section of a Spanish newspaper. He's a deputy editor to the news agency AKI of Italy and a correspondent for a United States-backed station called Radio Farda, which broadcasts Persian language news for information to Iran. Mr. Rafat is a fervent defender of the cause of Iranian students, women, journalists, and intellectuals, as well as human rights. Based in Rome since 1970, he has been awarded several prizes for his journalistic work, including the prestigious prize given by Reporters Without Borders in 2008, which is the prize is named after the Italian journalist who was killed along with a cameraman in Somalia in 1994. This prize recognizes courageous, investigative, and fact-based reporting. In June of 2008, Mr. Rafat was declared persona non grata and denied admission to the United Nations Food Summit in Rome by organizers whom he believes were acting at the request of the Iranian government because of his earlier reports on the controversy surrounding Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad's visit to Italy. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to our panelists, and with that, I'll ask Dr. Haqiqatjou to start.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank Professor Saberi and also Dean Marks for a wonderful panel discussion today, and also I would like to thank all of you for being here. Despite the rhetoric of democracy and human rights, the main priority of the U.S. in the nuclear issue, Americans believe that Iran will very soon be able to build a nuclear bomb. So they are in fact resolved to do all they can to stop Iran's effort for uranium enrichment under any circumstances and in any form. In doing so, they are following three different lines: diplomatic negotiation, economic sanction, and failing those methods, a targeted military attack on nuclear facilities. Meanwhile, on the one hand, the media constantly echoes a threat against Iran by mentioning the possibility of an attack by Israel or the use of penetrating bombs to try to urge Iran to play by the rules and behave at the negotiation table. On the other hand, the high democratic rank of the permanent member of the United Nations Security Council are busily at work to convey a serious message to Iran that the failure of the diplomatic negotiation means either economic sanction or even a military option. But contrary to what 5+1 expected, the October 1st negotiation led to results that were highly promising for both parties. The diplomats of 5+1 assumed that the Iranian government was still buying time, so to speak, a game they had constantly been playing for the past few years. According to the October 1st agreement, a considerable amount of low-enriched uranium will be delivered to Russia to be enriched further up to 20% and further processed in France and to be sent back to as a fuel of the Tehran reactor for medical purpose. Why is this agreement considered to be such an important achievement for both sides that President Obama and Tehran has called the negotiation as a constructive one? First, for 5+1, it was a considerable achievement that a great amount of uranium would be sent out of the country, so the Iranian would no longer have a sufficient amount of uranium at their deposit to build a bomb. In fact, 5+1 believes it has been successful to slow down, if not entirely stop, the clock on Iran's getting access to the bomb. Second, also this is a stage in trust building. In which all parties intend to secure collective trust by implementing the agreement in good faith. Third, Iranians, on the other hand, think they have won by securing sufficient fuels for Tehran's reactor. Also, with this negotiation, Iran has averted the risk of multilateral economic sanction, or at least have delayed that possibility. 5, perhaps most importantly, the global public opinion is distracted from Iran's violation of human rights and domestic crisis to the nuclear issue. Even since 2005, once Iran resumed its enrichment, the Western powers' goal was to get Iran to suspend its nuclear activities altogether, and the Iranian government absolutely insisted on continuing enrichment inside the country. In reaction to Iran's nuclear activities, the UN imposed 3 sets of economic sanctions against Iran in the interim period. A fundamental difference between the October 1st negotiation and the history of the previous encounters is that both parties backed away from their previous demands. On the one hand, there was no more talk of suspension, and on the other hand, Iran agreed to send out uranium for higher enrichment outside of the country. Right now, this agreement is only limited to the existing stock of uranium and does not apply to the further nuclear production. The West's next goal is to generalize the agreement to be applied to all future Iranian nuclear enrichment. Even this limited agreement has surprised the West, and now the puzzling question is why Iran came to such a compromise at this point. They are rightly curious to know the reason why Iran flexed the muscle, something it had been resisting for so long. Is it a consequence of the Green Movement, or is it due to Iran's concern about further economic sanction? My own view is that the persistence of the Green Movement and democratic challenges that it is posed to the legitimacy of the government are the main reason for Iran's compromise. The fact of the matter is that the government cannot fight 2 battles, domestic and international, both at the same time. Looking at the domestic crisis, it seems that the government has chosen a strategy of domestic suppression and international reconciliation. There is no doubt that the economic sanctions imposed since 2005 and the possibility of even greater sanctions have adversely impacted the economic conditions, and worsening economic conditions have in turn exacerbated the crisis of legitimacy facing the government. My last point is that the October changes in the Iranian approach to nuclear negotiation is only a tactical measure in reaction to the internal crisis that the government is experiencing. If the Green Movement continues to flourish in the next few months, there is a good chance that the government will have to maintain a cooperative stance with regards to the nuclear issue. So the fate of the nuclear issue is in fact closely linked to the fate of the Green Movement in the months to come. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Denise Provo. I represent the city of Somerville in the Massachusetts House of Representatives, and I'm very pleased to be back at my old law school, from which I graduated in 1982. I have to disavow from the beginning any particular expertise on Iran. I don't speak Farsi. I have never been to Iran. But I have an interest in the world and in that region, which started with an interest in India, and I quickly realized that I could not understand India without reference to its history of invasion and occupation and immigration, and without reference to the countries that surround it and how those nations came to be. And so naturally, I have had to think about Iran in the context of a region. And the only reason that has come to bear on my work in the legislature is because of a movement which is sweeping the country, which is to decentralize foreign policy and to make light of the supremacy clause of our Constitution, I suppose, and allow states to make particular foreign policies of their own, especially in the form of sanctions. And in Massachusetts is currently considering in its legislature several bills that would require the state pension fund to divest from companies doing business in Iran. And there are a number of other states, including large ones, California, Florida, Georgia, that have adopted these bills. And there have been campaigns in many other states to do this, which only came to my attention, I think, in the summer of 2007, when I got an email from a colleague, I'm filing this bill, hope you'll sign on as a co-sponsor. That was quickly followed by a letter from a lobbyist well known in the building, urging all of the members to sign on as co-sponsors to this bill. And in the process of which the bill acquired more than 60 co-sponsors in the House and Senate, even though it was being circulated in July. But when I first saw this proposal, I thought back to a talk I had attended at the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Shortly after she was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, the Academy had invited Shirin Ebadi to speak. And she was a mesmerizing speaker, even through an interpreter. And when the questions came, everyone in the audience wanted to know, how can we, as Americans, engage positively with Iran? How can we help the human rights movement in Iran? And her answer in each case was the same. You must support civil society. And so when I read this divestment bill, the first question that came to my mind was, how does this bill support civil society in Iran? How does it promote human rights? And as I went to work researching bills like this, efforts like this, the whole history of United States sanctions against Iran, I came to the conclusion that this bill was not what it purported to be, an instrument of justice, but indeed was designed to marginalize and demonize Iran and push our country toward further disengagement. And later that fall, there was a bill that was passed in both houses of the legislature that required the state's pension fund to divest from companies doing business in the Sudan. A bill about which I had some mixed feelings, not because I have any love for Sudan or for their principal investors, the Chinese national petroleum companies, but because I could sense where these kinds of efforts might lead. And indeed, the minority party in the House brought floor amendments to the Sudan divestment bill, to require us to divest from companies doing business in Iran. And I said, here it comes. It will keep coming. And a couple days after that floor debate, in which I spoke vehemently against divestment from Iran, I had occasion to go to Washington for a national conference. The Women's Legislative Lobby is a group of legislators who are promoters of peace and who emphasize diplomacy over militarism. And all of the talk in Washington at the time was about the dispute between the Army and that didn't want to take military action against Iran, and the Navy and the Air Force that thought that we could manage it. And the U.S. Senate had just passed a resolution authorizing the president to take military action against Iran without further consultation in Congress. And it was alarmingly, we were alarmingly close at the time, I feel, to taking that military action in Iran, something which was forestalled, I think, only by the publication of a report that suggested that Iran was not so close to achieving a nuclear weapon as was being suggested. But the situation since then in Iran has become much worse, certainly for human rights, and also in terms of the concern of the rest of the world about Iran's nuclear capability. And all of that background affects the likelihood that these divestment bills will gain traction. In the last session, the divestment bill passed in the House by a good margin, although not without controversy, and was stopped in the Senate. The effort continues apace in this session, and I'm concerned that its chances are better, especially since the U.S. House of Representatives last Thursday passed a bill authorizing states to divest from companies doing business in Iran. And while that bill has to pass the U.S. Senate as well, it seems to be incompatible with President Obama's announced intention to have a diplomatic rapprochement with Iran. And it concerns me that Congress would delegate any measure of foreign policy to local legislatures, which, while they have excellent expertise in many areas, do not have the resources or the expertise to study foreign policy, and many of whom, I am sorry to say, could probably not find Iran on a map. And I will defer now to people who know much more about Iran than I, and if you have questions, we will have time, I'm sure, later. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I have brought several things I had written about sanctions, so please feel free to take copies. I am sorry that I didn't know this was going to be so well attended, so didn't bring. There are 4 pieces there. One article is written by Hamid Zanganem and myself in 1998 about the sanctions. There are some liberal-leaning things in it. I am totally innocent of that. I wouldn't say such things Mr. Zanganem said, and I had to go along with my co-author. There are some siding with President Khatami as you know, unfortunately turned out to be a piece of what you know what, and he really messed up the whole process. The second piece is something I wrote about sanctions in the Encyclopedia of Developing World. The third one is something I submitted to the Committee on Public Service of Massachusetts Senate and House of Representatives. And last one is a reaction to the crash of Topolov in Iran that killed 168 people, and really it can be related to sanctions because Iran cannot buy airplanes. If I may joke a little bit and say something, among Iranian Shiites, the most important story is the martyrdom of the third Imam in around 700. And in that story, there is a really bad guy who kills the Imam. And in Passion plays that it is played, usually that bad guy is a very athletic guy with a big mustache and fierce looking. And sometimes people get very excited and beat him up. When I go to any conference, I think I am playing the role of that guy without, bodily resembling them. And so if I say things and later on you are going to feel like beating me up, remember that this is the United States, it's not Iran, and you can be sued. All right. Let's start from the beginning. And I will be brief. Number one, the Iranians are building an atomic bomb, whether you like it or whether you like it. That decision was made probably around 1987 due to the Iran-Iraq war, and Iran is going to do that. No matter how many sanctions you put or how many hours Mr. al-Baradei talks to anybody, they are going to do that. There will be a lot of discussions and going up and down. It's not going to work. Count de Gobineau was a famous writer, French writer, and he was a French ambassador to Iran in the 19th century. He has a famous sentence: Iranians are born negotiators. So there is no way anybody else could, if you have been to Tehran's bazaar, where I was born, you see that you cannot negotiate with an Iranian because he's going to out-negotiate you. And so these negotiations are not going to bear any fruit. There are two options, there are two real options in front of the West and the United States. One is they accept that Iran is going to have an atomic bomb. Pakistan has an atomic bomb, India has an atomic bomb, and there are consequences to that. Saudi Arabia may want it, Turkey may want, Azerbaijan may want that, and there may be other things that could happen. For example, Israel may take certain actions. And the bomb could end up in the hands of Hezbollah or somebody else. But that's one thing. The consequence for Iranians will be bad, and the Iranian economy will collapse. The second thing is war. So why people talk about sanctions? I explained that because both options are difficult to swallow, people go for sanctions. Sanctions are not going to work. Sanctions are unenforceable. Let me give you an example. If you go back to history from 1939, the United States has put pressure on Iran, Turkey, Italy, Mexico, Colombia, not to sell drugs, illicit drugs, to this country. To this day, they are doing that. If you cannot stop importation of illicit drugs into your own country, you want to stop importation of, for example, gasoline to Iran or electronics to Iran, with Iran having such borders with Afghanistan, Pakistan, Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, Turkey, Iraq. You probably haven't seen those borders. If you see those borders, there is no way you could stop these things coming in. So these sanctions are not enforceable. Even if they are enforced, they are not going to change the economic, political behavior of any country. If it was going to change the behavior of a country, it would have changed the behavior of Fidel Castro. Since 1959, he's been there, and there has been sanctions against him. All right? The only thing that has happened, his beard has got longer and whiter. Nothing else has happened. So the sanctions are good. The sanctions are going to hurt the economy of the United States. One of the things I said about this divestment that Massachusetts wants to do, the only thing that is going to happen is going to hurt these retirement funds. Because what is going to happen? Chinese are going to take the place of any company that does not deal with Iran. But what it does is that it's going to hurt the Iranians. I was reading about Cuba, that people of Cuba, notwithstanding what Michael Moore may say, they are living on $20 a month. Think about that. And they are miserable. And this is the only thing is going to do is going to hurt the Iranians and so on. So I'll cut it short, and I will be happy to answer any question. You have two choices to make. One is that accept the situation as it is or change. By the way, there was something said about the green movement. I told you that I am the bad guy that you will not invite again. But the green movement has failed. It's not going to win. And don't think about that. And if we want, we can talk about that. I have another piece on that one. I haven't brought it, but I have said. This is a wishful thinking on the part of Iranians to think that they could overthrow this government. This government is sitting there. It's becoming very military, very intelligence-oriented, and also it's not just political power. These soldiers, these intelligence officials have economic stakes in this country. Just a few days ago, the parliament, Iranian parliament passed, gave the permission that the Revolutionary Guard own the communication industry in the whole country. That is, all the the biggest communication firm was sold to them. Thank you.
Thank you. So here we have darker views and more rosy views on the future of the green movement and all of that. So if we can ask Mr. Rafat, please, to comment on all that has been said so far.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here, but I also want to ask Mr. Dadkhan the floor to didn't beat me. I will not sue anybody, but anyway, it's not nice, it's not fair, because I would be also very frank. Just few hours after the October 1st meeting in Geneva, I was in a meeting in Brussels, first and second. One of the persons who was in Geneva, he would come to the Brussels meeting. That was the former British ambassador in Iran, that he's member of the UK delegation at the 5+1. And I asked him what was happening, why everybody was happy with Geneva meeting. He told, we have no choice. We must be optimistic, because if we aren't and we didn't show it, we have two choices: Iran with a bomb or bombing Iran. So the only third way is to be optimistic that we can do something else. I agree with him that the Iranian nuclear program is nothing new. It started in '75. There was no Islamic revolution. There was a kingdom in Iran. Iran started with support of the United States and France and Germany. And the aim was to have not a central for non-military purposes, even if there was a plan for just as a cover. It was military, and I will explain why Iran needs a bomb. I mean, in the ruling, everybody who was ruling, who rules Iran, thinks that it's necessary to have a bomb. And after the revolution, there was a war. The Iranian facilities were bombed by the Iraqis, was destroyed, and at the end of the war, they have started to rebuild it. They can discuss anything in Geneva, in Vienna, in Washington, in Tehran, but the Iranian plan, a historical plan, is to have it. They can delay it, they can suspend it for a few years as they have done it at the Khatami government, but anyway, they need it. They need it because they are a regional power. And today, you cannot be a regional power anywhere if you don't have nuclear bombs. You are not accepted, you are not respected as a power. Iran wants to be a regional power, and that's why it's looking for a nuclear bomb. In this moment, Iran is challenged in the last year by Saudi Arabia on his regional role. Saudi Arabia has more money and has a lot of friends in the West. Iran has less money and has no friend in the West. So Iran is somehow in difficulties to exercise his regional power. He's challenged by the Saudi. The only thing that he can get supremacy or superiority to the Saudis is to have the nuclear facilities. That's why they need it. So what they have done in Geneva, very simply, Iran is the winner of Geneva attack because has bought time. Nobody discussed about stopping enrichment. Iran got enriched uranium of 20%, 19, I don't know how much. So they can continue after in Iran. Nobody imposed new sanction. Ahmadinejad was fighting in two fronts, inside and outside, against his enemies inside the country. I mean, the people who was challenging him inside the country and outside. Now, he has only one front. He can concentrate himself on the internal front to challenge the green movements. But I think the green movement has a future. Is starting, there's nothing that in 2 months will overthrow the regime. But something has started that will continue. Nobody can stop it. It's like the Iranian bomb. Cannot be stopped, the green movement. And what has got the Western, the 5+1? Nothing. If somebody can tell me what they have got in Geneva to be so optimistic, I didn't see anything. Because Iran will continue to enrich uranium. Iran will buy enriched uranium. Iran has no new sanctions. That is all points favoring Iran. What is from the other side, from the Western country? I'm half Western. I mean, my mother is Italian. I'm an Italian citizen. As a Western, I didn't get anything. Because Ahmadinejad even hasn't changed his literature, I mean, his way of doing politics. Obama has changed the American way of referring Iran is not a devil, is not an enemy. President Obama started to speak to Iranian people, Iranian rulers, everything. Okay, but what was the result from the other side? November 4, there would be, again, anniversary of the occupation of Iranian embassy. Regime wants to make a big demonstration. I think that the Greens, they will change like they have done with the Jerusalem Day and these things, the nature of this, but the government is continuing to do the same way speaking. So, for the moment, Ahmadinejad has won on in these last months. The question is, the United States for 30 years, they didn't recognize Iran because there was no relation after occupation, November 4 of 1979. That was a bad thing, I think. They had to find some way to discuss. Now, after 30 years, they want to recognize Iran in 2 months. Exactly when in Iran is happening something new. That's the green movement, the protest. In Iran, in the 30 years, the biggest protest against the regime was 50,000 people. And it wasn't against the regime. It was supporting Mr. Khatami. Somehow, we can say. And it was 50,000. That was the biggest demo organized by non-government, not by the government, in Iran in 30 years. 3 months ago, we have had the mayor of Tehran told, and it's not me, 3 million people in the streets in Tehran. Just now that 3 million people has find the way to organize himself, to express them, the concern and everything about the regime, the United States are going to recognize the government. How can be it interpreted by Iranian youth? Iranian youth, they love Americans. The most pro-Americans in the Middle East are Iranian young people. If you go to internet, and in Iran, you know, everything goes to internet, Facebook and Twitter. We make a revolt on Twitter. That would be maybe if the first Twitter revolution would be in Iran. My next book, publishing next week, is Revolution Online, Iran Revolution Online, because that's the reality. Okay, these people that they know every moment what is happening in the United States, and they are supporter of the American dream, American way of life, American culture, American film, American music. Now they started to hate United States because they cannot understand exactly when they are in the roads asking for democracy. After 30 years, United States is recognizing Iran. That's a question that they didn't find any answer for it. And it's a very dangerous question if it didn't find an answer.
Thank you. This is all wonderful. I meant to start with the first question, but since I took longer in the beginning, I'm going to forego my privilege of being the moderator and also the Iranian citizenship, so I'll just leave the first question to someone in the audience, please. Michael here is helping us with collecting questions, taking a cue, and calling on people. Thank you.
Great. Any questions? Here?
Hi, I was just wondering, considering what you said about the decentralization of sanctions at the federal level, is there ever any consideration by states to take on positive civil action? I mean, in promoting civil society within Iran, I'm thinking specifically of the Iran Human Rights Documentation Center and the fact that it lost all of its federal funding. If the states could step in, and also from the other panelists, if that would be effective. To what extent can an American NGO actually promote civil society within Iran? Thanks.
It's quite a combination of questions. I think that the question of engagement with civil society anywhere is one with which states, in other countries, I should say, is one with which states have no particular experience other than the anecdotal. You know, I have colleagues from with connections to other countries who will say, you know, bring in a delegation from Ireland or from Canada to talk about trade, or you know, the issue with needing passports to travel to Canada. That was a big issue. But these are all personal relationships, and I think that online relationships are probably the future of connections between civil societies. But states have no budgets. We don't have state departments. Our system is to have a national government. I think that there is certainly a place for individual citizens to make connections with groups in other nations. But it's even been hard to find out how civil society in Iran feels about things going on in the U.S. The communication channels are not so much there. And you know, after the election in June and the protests, you know, I wanted very much to find out if what civil society in Iran felt about the sanctions, because I wasn't sure. There's an Iranian American council that based in Washington that is active and has membership and does surveys. And from what I can tell, even people in the human rights activists in Iran are not in much agreement at the moment about how to proceed, but are pretty well unified against sanctions. And that's the best that I can learn, and I go on that basis. I would love to see more connections with civil society. You probably know the state of our state budget, and we will be funding nothing new. But I'm interested to hear also from the other panelists about how these connections could occur.
Hi. I kind of share the sentiment of the second speaker that diplomacy, for all the talk of this is, diplomacy is back, that the way things are unfolding, it doesn't seem to be following that. And so I just wonder how much, what I perceive is somewhat of the U.S. saying, do as we say, not as we do. And I think about, say, like Black Panthers in the 70s looking for like self-determination and political representation, but the way that was defeated, saying like you have a community that's all Black and they want to represent Black political officers, but then the region is you divide the district in half so that you don't have a Black majority anymore to be able to vote in office someone who represents their interests. So there's kind of these crafty ways that that the U.S. in its own history has suppressed the voice of its own people. And that's the civilized 70s, forget about fire hoses and stuff in the 60s. So, and then now we come to Guantanamo. So I just wonder how much there's a sense of, if we step in as trying to have this moral sense of, how a election should happen, how a protest should happen with our own history. I'm wondering if there's any perception of kind of like a U.S. arrogance, which is either fueling Iran being, whatever quote unquote rogue behavior, or just defeating diplomacy to begin with, because there's a sense of, do as we say, not as we do.
Well, I think you are on the mark here with some of this country's historic problems in relating to the rest of the world. As I walked here today from the train, I came across the plaza and someone was standing out with a huge placard that said, "Don't think like an American, care about people," or something of that nature. And it's true that if you look at the sweep of history and of this country's relations with the rest of the world, we don't see something pretty. Another Boston University graduate, Stephen Kinzer, who was for many years a reporter with the New York Times, has written a book, All the Shah's Men, about the CIA overthrow of Iran's democratically elected government in 1973, and another wonderful book, Overthrow, which is about the United States overthrow of governments all over the world. And this is a terrible legacy. And while I too am a hopeful person and have I could not do my work if I did not believe it was possible to do things differently. I see us being weighted down and, if not mired in, these historical instances and the kind of thinking that leads us to replicate this behavior over and over again. I think that there is a real problem of U.S. perception of the rest of the world, and also the fact that we deal with sovereign nations pretty much as sovereign nations without respect to their citizens, to their civil society, whose human rights are often trampled. And and there is this question of, well, how do you deal with other nations if not sovereign to sovereign? But I think this is an area where we as individuals can make a difference in a positive way, in influencing our country's foreign policy and in having our own relations with people of other nations. But, you know, if everybody in this room were to call their U.S. senator, their U.S. representative, you know, this U.S. Senate last week passed a bill to impose, you know, dire sanctions on Iran in terms of gasoline importation, which may not be enforceable, but you're right. This sends a terrible, confusing, and negative message to people in Iran, and I'm not surprised if they think that we are a strange and barbaric country.
I just had one question on sanctions. You say that sanctions don't work and they're not effective, but there is a delicate balance. Treasury has had a very successful campaign since 9/11 and has frozen certain bank accounts, certain funds that have funded certain al-Qaeda organizations, terrorist organizations. So where do you strike the balance between effective sanctions and sanctions that impede on the civil enhancement of the Iranian society?
I also would like to answer the previous question. Can I? What you said is 100% correct. What the Treasury has done in terms of financial and monetary sanctions are very effective, very biting, and hurts the government much more than the people. Sanctions like trade sanctions are mostly hurting people. What I said is not effective. I said they are not effective in changing the political behavior of a government. Those sanctions have been very effective, those from the Treasury. They have been very effective, but as you can see, they haven't changed something. I would like to go back to the previous question. I fled Iran and came to this country, and I always have felt that I owe this country a lot. And I respect Americans and America, and that's why I'm going to say what I'm going to say. And if this time you are going to not even think that this is America and you want to beat me up, that's fine. And I apologize to everybody if I'm contradicting anybody. First of all, Dr. Mossadegh was not overthrown by the CIA. Read The Legacy of Ashes. These people cannot pull up their pants, let alone overthrow any government. Read that book. I have researched this. Dr. Mossadegh was overthrown by Iranians, and they, especially the clerics, didn't want Dr. Mossadegh. He had no popularity, and he was overthrown. This is a story that Kermit Roosevelt made up to cover up other things is meaningless. If you could take $2 million, go to a country and overthrow that, why didn't he take $2 billion and overthrow the Russian government? $20 billion and overthrow the Russian governments. Read that book. The man doesn't know which side is up when he's talking. So the United States has been helpful to other countries. It saved Europe both by defeating Germany and by Marshall Plan. It has been a beacon of hope for a lot of people in Eastern Europe and today for Iran. The mistake that was done, and Dr. Hayatu just and Mr. Rafat pointed out, is the fact that Iranians were hoping for support for this movement, and they didn't get it. In one of the demonstrations, Iranians were shouting, "Death to Russia." They may change, and China. They may change that. Actually, somebody entered who knows much more about these things than I do. But now they may change it because the fact of the matter is that President Obama hasn't had any success internationally. And as a result of that, he had to make something. And therefore, he backed down in front of Iranians and put away the issue of human rights, something that the previous administration was strong about it. I know you guys don't like President Bush. I liked him a lot. So he supported the human rights. That has been taken off, and Iranians, needless to say, are not happy about the situation.
Can I add something about sanctions? I'm not going to speak about the coup d'etat of 1953 because it would be a long story. I think that there was some part of the Iranians who didn't support Dr. Mossadegh, but I think without the help from outside, they cannot throw him now, because if not, he was not elected. But anyway, it's a very long discussion. It takes a lot of time. On sanction is easier. The problem of sanction is that the West has problem to put more sanction, because the market of Iran in the last 3 years after the sanctions started, it goes more and more every time to China. I mean, reducing the export from Italy and Germany, that they were the two main partners, Western partners of Iran. Now, this market has been occupied by China. And that's one of the reasons that they don't want to put more, because somehow they give the Iranian market as a very nice market, very big market, 70 million person market, and to the Chinese and some other countries. That's one reason. The other one is that the sanctions are, when we speak about sanctions, which one? Because there are so named intelligent sanctions and the other stupid sanctions, how they call it. And the stupid one is not, I call it stupid, because if the other one is intelligent, the other must be stupid in a way. The intelligent one, that one used against Al-Qaeda, for example, by many governments, starting United States and also European government, has worked. We think, a lot of Iranians, that if the sanctions are on the 648 companies of past Iran, like the telecommunication, as the last one they have bought about in Iran, it can work. And where they have used it have worked, because they have some difficulties. Many of their factories in Iran are closing because they don't have cash money to pay them. They have tried to send money outside. It is working. But if they do sanction, Iraqi-style sanctions, just to understand this. I visited Iraq during the sanctions several times. The price of the sanctions was not paid by Saddam, but by the people. There was nothing in the hospital, but after 91 war, all his federal buildings, government buildings were rebuilt by Saddam. His new house was rebuilt with oil for food. But they didn't buy any medicine to the hospital. Iraq has one of the best medical systems in the Middle East and was reduced to nothing. The problem is which sanction? Sanction can work. The intelligent one didn't harm West and didn't harm Iranians. The stupid sanctions harm everybody, European economy and Iranians, and helps China, who is supporting the nuclear policy of Iran.
Actually, if I can just add a short bit, that survey that the National Iranian American Council did of its members about sanctions did distinguish among kinds of sanctions, and 98% of the respondents were against broad-based economic sanctions, but more than half were in favor of two kinds of sanctions. One is freezing the overseas assets of members of the ruling regime in Iran, and they were also interested in restrictions on travel for those leaders. And that sort of fits with a statement that Shirin Ebadi made in July, around the early July in Italy, that she thought that the West should impose political sanctions on Iran, but not broad-based economic sanctions, which only hurt civil society.
There was a Time article that just came out that said the secret negotiations with Iran began, I think, in June, which it seems like explains perhaps Obama's silence as to the protests that a lot of people were commenting on at the time. My question is, did Iranians, and particularly Iranians in this Green Movement, feel betrayed about this, and can you describe, if so, how?
Iran is one of the largest country in the Middle East that people have a positive view toward the United States. And you can see such a positive attitude toward the United States in any other Middle East country. However, after June 12 presidential election and crackdown of the Green Movement and protest, and what the United States foreign policy was toward this movement has made Iranian people and mostly youth who involved in the Green Movement dissatisfied people toward the United States. And I think that is really hurting the image of the United States among the Green Movement because of legitimacy that the government gave to the Iran's illegal government, and also because of the negotiation, and because people thinks that the United States, despite saying that they defend human rights and democracy, they do not have enough support for, human rights issue in Iran. And this is, most of people thinks this is a failure of the United States foreign policy toward Iran.
Can I add small? Betrayed, maybe no, but they are suspicious and unhappy with President Obama's policy toward Iran, especially because there is the famous letter of President Obama to Khamenei that nobody knows what's inside. So every, pardon?
More than one letter.
Yeah, more than I know. So every Iranian is imagining what can be in this letter. And they are very suspicious and very somehow concerned about what can be in this letter and what the consequence of this letter.
My question is for the professor from Northeastern. Given Israel's stance that they will not put up with a nuclear Iran, does the real question, you pose the two alternatives as either a nuclear Iran or war. Given Israel's stance, does the real alternative become war from Washington or war from Israel?
Okay, from Israel's point of view, it is an existential question. The question is that you have to put yourself in the position of the Prime Minister of Israel and say, could I take chances with these crazy people? It is like somebody holding a gun towards me, and I want to react, and somebody says, no, this guy is not going to fire it. No. Yes, maybe he's not going to fire, but can I believe that? So that's from their point of view. The issue is that Israel, my military information, except when I served in the Iranian army, I don't have that much military information. But from what I understand, this is very costly, and the probability of success in any way may be small. So the only way they can do that is with the green light and active participation by the United States. So that is, I don't know if I'm answering your question. That is, they would go to that in that fashion. However, if it becomes to the point, it gets to the point where they think it's either me or you, then I think no matter what the cost, and they are going to take that, as they did in 1980 with Iraq, and with Syria some time ago.
I'm going to hop in. Sorry about that. This is so fascinating. I could be here all day. I wanted to ask you and Fatima, I'm very intrigued about this discussion because I'm trying to think of Obama sitting as president, and he has all this pressure and worried about the nuclear bomb and so on, and he's trying to get a recalcitrant Congress to go along with him. And what actions do you think the United States could have taken immediately after the election in June that actually would have been positive with the Iranian people, the younger people? I'm really fascinated with your report of how the younger Iranians are viewing the United States. So what kinds of things, where did he go wrong? What could he have done that you think would have carried more weight and helped the Iranian people to get a better view of support or possible support of the U.S.?
It's very simple. We told it, I think also Fatima agree with me. We ask don't discuss with Iran, don't negotiate with Iran. But when you are negotiating with Iran, don't negotiate only about nuclear issue. Put on the table other issues to negotiate. Among them, human rights. So even at that point, if also Iranian government didn't want and they leave the negotiation because the United States are asking to discuss also about human rights, nobody will think that the fault is in Washington. But when there's a silence from the United States, officials, not the press. What we are saying is you can find it regularly on New York Times and Washington Post. There's some problem. When you are ignoring completely what had happened in Iran after June 12th, with the rapes of tens and tens of the young people in the prisons, killing more than 70 or 100, I don't know how much they are, 4,000 people. Only 400 journalists has to leave Iran in the last 2 months. And most of them, they are in Iraq because nobody wants to accept them, no country. We are trying. I'm a member of the International Journalists Association to take them out of Iraq because it's very dangerous there. It's not so easy, even that. So if there is a total silence on these issues, put yourself inside of somebody in Iran who likes United States and he feel uncomfortable with this.
So you're not saying total isolationism, because I think one of the problems that President Bush ran into...
We want to discuss, because if you discuss about nuclear, you can push to discuss, like they have done with the Soviet Union with Helsinki. Mm-hmm. One, I give you one, give me one. Mm-hmm. Not I give you two, and you don't have to give me anything.
Just to add to this comment, I completely agree with Ahmad. Just one thing. Look at today, if the nuclear issue, nuclear talk, is a priority of United States foreign policy, for even reaching out to goals on this issue, United States needs to address Greens movement demand on the negotiation, because we think even though the October 1st negotiation was succeed, this is due to this alive Green movement, which is the future of the country, is this Green movement. And so if international community, including United States, support this Green movement in the country, that strengthening Green movement in the country would make deeper rift among Iranians' elites. And by this situation, I think even United States and West will see further result on the nuclear negotiation. So even from the United States national interest, national security interest, addressing human rights, democracy is important on the negotiation table.
Okay, we are over our allotted time, but I'd be delighted to go on take more questions if the panel agrees to take probably 3 or 4 more questions. Okay, so maybe 3 or more.
Yes. The last speaker mentioned that he didn't think anything positive for the United States had emerged, that the United States had won nothing from the negotiations. But I wonder, given our very grave interest in what happens in Iraq and Afghanistan, how an agreement over the nuclear issue with Iran might affect, in fact, Iran's ability to work with the United States in those areas, and perhaps in Lebanon and other parts of the Middle East. So I'd like you to address that issue, please.
I think that, let's see what's the Iranian priority in the area, in the region. United States, Bush administration, make a big favor to Iran in Afghanistan and in Iraq. Taliban and Saddam Hussein both were enemy of Iran. They were eliminated by the United States, so Iran now has two countries where it can be very influent and is influent. I was in both countries several times in the last years to cover election and this thing. Every time I go there, the presence of Iran is, the Islamic Republic is more and more. I recently was in Basra in South Iraq in the city council. Most of the councillors, they speak Persian among them, not Arabic. So much imposed by Iran, they speak among them in Farsi. So what they can do, Iran will have always, and in the past have had, important regional power. The problem, as the nuclear is, India has nuclear, Pakistan has nuclear bombs, and West is not concerned about it, didn't consider it danger. Why? Because they trust the regime, the people who are ruling somehow. That's, I think, that the problem also is the role of Iran in the region and on the nuclear issue is if in Iran there is a democratic government or less extremist government, let's say, that the West can trust to it, the problem is resolved. But the problem can never be resolved until this government is ruling the country. Because anyway, any compromise, any agreement, and they have shown it in 30 years, any agreement is not respected by Iran. Iran has signed several hundreds agreements, international agreements. One of them, to don't, no death penalty for the execution for the kids. Tomorrow, they will execute one. And last week, they have did one. And they have signed it. Iran is it was the 13th country who signed the sanction. So there is, you cannot, with the agreement, you cannot resolve the problem. You must resolve the problem deeper with the regime. Then Iran would not be any problem. And it wasn't the problem for years and years. Nobody, even when the Iranians didn't trust the government, how the international community can trust them? Iran needs to export his problem outside with proxy wars. Because any proxy war means that all the attention goes to that country and not focused on Iran anymore. Iran is doing creating proxy wars in Afghanistan, in Lebanon, even in Israel, in Palestinian territory, in Gaza, just to keep busy his enemies, what they consider enemy elsewhere. So the international community is not focused on what is going on in Iran.
Hi, I was just curious about how you think the current instability in Pakistan and the recent bombings in southeast Iran itself are affecting the regime and negotiations with the West.
Well, Mr. Rafat said something very important. The Iranian government needs an external enemy. From day one, they needed an external enemy. There were no need for hostage taking in the U.S. Embassy. They did that. The war, it is true that Iraq invaded, but Iran's government didn't want it to end. After that was finished, Mr. Khomeini started the shenanigan of Salman Rushdie. Every time, you need to have an enemy outside. Some people said the United States is bad and this, okay. Consider this: if they do not blame the United States, then they have to take responsibility for themselves. The economy, there's 20% inflation. There is more than 12% unemployment. If you don't blame it on the United States, on whom you are going to blame it? And that bombing that you said, it's actually very welcome. The instability in Pakistan is very welcome. There are martyrs. They are going to be going and coming, and so quite the contrary. They like this. These are the staple of survival of this government. Because also they say that because we are facing an external enemy, if you criticize me, you are siding with the enemy.
Yeah, two more questions.
Hi. I come from more of a political science background, so I wanted to ask a question maybe to see how that is applicable in the real world, which no one would claim political science is very applicable a lot of times. But there's a common theory somewhat that says that countries actually become and regions become more stable when multiple countries have nuclear weapons. There's been evidence that political scientists point to that say this is a common occurrence in the past 50 years or so. And I was just wondering, within your relative fields, is there anyone even talking about that, or is there anyone preparing for that contingency of what do we do if not only Iran, but also Iran and Saudi Arabia and Jordan suddenly have nuclear weapons, and how that might change the dynamics of the region?
The most important lesson from Iraq for the Iranian Pastaran, the Revolutionary Guards, was that the Iraqis practically, de facto, after 91 war, Gulf War, they have started to they have stopped their nuclear and chemical activities. For years, all the inspectors from International Energy and other institutions, they went there looking for that, didn't find it. And they say after, when United States was sure that there was no nuclear, they have bombed Iraq. So the lesson for the Iran is we must have the bomb. We must continue with enrichment, because so nobody will bomb us, never, and nobody will change the regime. So they consider some kind of insurance for the Islamic Republic. And that's true. For more stability, not stability in positive sense of stability, but stability of the regime. That's one of the most important things that they have. They have two, one regional power and the other internal stability. That's the two reasons that Iran wants in this moment to have nuclear activities.
May I add one small thing? This is similar to saying that in communities where there is no gun control and everybody has gun, the crime rate goes down, because you are not going to invade a house that you know the guy may have a gun. Okay, this is what you are saying. Except that, what if one of the community members is crazy? That theory, I think it's correct. With a bunch of sane people. But I doubt Mr. Ahmadinejad is really sane.
I'd like to add a final comment for his question. Depend on who run the country. If you have a democratic government, you can have a nuclear bomb, and everybody in the neighboring and in the region to make sure nobody would use that bomb against another country, because Iran has a history of invasion, not just Saddam Hussein, even throughout the history. So if we look at to the example of Pakistan and India, you will see a stability between these two countries. But the important things is having a democratic government, Iranian people looking for democratic government, and this green movement would lead to the democratic government if the world could support this democratic movement in the country.
If I may just, I would just add, I don't know, I can't say that I know that there is stability that comes from every country having its own nuclear weapon. I know that as a matter of public health research, it has been amply demonstrated that owning a gun greatly increases your chances of being killed or injured by a gunshot. And I think that that there's a great deal of what we assume about countries with nuclear arms is really a matter of faith. I know back in the fall of 2007, when there was so much focus on in the federal government of the U.S. on Iran's growing nuclear capability, the newspapers in India were saying, what's the big deal? Pakistan, India's enemy, has nuclear weapons, and no one even knows who really controls the bomb in Pakistan. And a week or 10 days later, I saw a tiny story in the U.S. press saying that Washington had issued a statement that nuclear weapons in Pakistan were safely under the control of the military, whatever that means. I think that it's hard to think regionally and to have enough knowledge of every country to know how the whole puzzle fits. But I think that it's also easy and dangerous to get caught up in fads of thinking about, which country is the worst, and to not to sort of hold countries to the same standards. And I think that as much as Iran is playing the game of diverting attention elsewhere, I think that there is at the same time there has been a drumbeat in this country to focus attention on Iran to the exclusion of certain other actors in the world. And part of the way I judge that is just by what comes in on my email unbidden. There's a consulting group, a terrorism consulting group that sends everyone in the Massachusetts legislature, perhaps nationwide, regular frightening newsletters about every development in Iran. We don't hear from the Green Movement in Iran, because how would we? I get an offer to look at a podcast of the danger of Islamic extremism to the United States. These just pop up on my email, and that's where the emphasis is. The counterbalance isn't there.
Last question.
Farsi is all over the net. It's one of the top languages in the world and on the internet in terms of sheer size. So it's certainly a people and nation of internet communicators. And there was a lot made of the recently disputed election and how Twitter was used in other social networking sites to organize people. And I wonder if you could comment on how, now that the Revolutionary Guard controls a large majority of the telecom sector in that country, how do you see that affecting either facilitating change or stopping it and the development of a nuclear weapon?
That is an important issue. Unfortunately, by owning the main majority of the share of the telecommunication, beside money they could get from this industry, this is a very important way of controlling green movement through, slow downing the internet, also to putting more surveillance stuff on it, or to put more to block the internet. I would suggest that if international community would support this green movement, technical support is so crucial to support the movement, because internet is right now is one of the main avenue for communication. Although even when we don't have any internet, people could find another venue for communication, and Iranian youth will find another way, but this is very difficult. Investment on internet, investment on other information technology, right? For example, such as broadcasting, radio, TV, for this democratic movement could help to foster the movement further and further. And just one point on the movement: if this movement grows, we will see more challenges to Iran's government foreign policy. Just 2 weeks ago, there was a big rally in Tehran, and one of the main slogans of this green movement was no Palestine, no Lebanon, I sacrifice my life for Iran. This is, does not mean that Iranians do not support human rights issue in Palestine or in any other country. Just that was a reaction to Iran's foreign policy toward, for example, toward regional policy. I may say that with such a support, this movement could address more Iran's foreign policy to have a peace in the world and in the region, and a democratic government inside the country.
Thank you. This has been absolutely wonderful. When we were putting this panel together, I couldn't ever imagine that there would be such a wide variety of different opinions on different things. But that's perhaps because we Iranians are by nature in an agreement to disagree. So if you have 50 Iranians in a room, you will definitely have 150 opinions. This has been really amazing. Thank you so much. I have to thank everyone that has helped so much with the organization of the event. To go back to something that I started with, which is the concern of the students of the Faculty of Law of the University of Tehran, who are fighting to chase away basically the professors who are leaving the question of criminal procedure as a basically mockery of the rule of law and justice. Probably something that we may want to take away after this session is that if we are not helping them, at least we should not hurt them. Of course, economic sanctions would hurt them, but neither would ignoring the questions of human rights and democracy in the so-called ongoing negotiations help them in any way. Thank you so much. Thank you for the panel for being so generous.